Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two returning guests, very special guests. We talked last year, 2021, about their book, which they published, titled Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. And they are two brothers, Paul and Philip D. Collins. And this is not their first book. They wrote another very influential book titled The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. Philip D. Collins has acted as the editor for The Hidden Face of Terrorism. He's also written articles for Paranoia Magazine, MKZine, newswithviews.com, and the Biped, the official website of Darwinian Descent and Conspiracy Archive. And Paul David Collins is the author of The Hidden Face of Terrorism. And in 1999, he earned his associate in arts and science degree from Clark State Community College. In 2006, he graduated from Wright State University and has worked as a professional journalist for 4 years. He's covered local news for a variety of different publications in that area: New Carlisle Sun, Tip City Herald, Kettering Oakwood Times, Beaver Creek News Current, Vandalia Drummer, Springboro Sun, Inglewood Independent, Fairborn Daily Herald, and the Xenia Daily Gazette. So I'm delighted to have them back. So Paul and Philip, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, William. Thank you so much.
So for people who may not have heard our last interview, I mean, your book is very thorough. You've done tons of research, you can tell. Maybe we can just start for what we talked about last time and then talk about some of these other issues that I don't think we really covered.
Sure.
Issues having to do with the bomb and I think the mechanizing man, and really kind of this idea of the new man. Maybe we can go into that. So
absolutely.
Go ahead. Okay, great.
Sure. Well, to give you a basic recap, basically what the book deals with is what can be called the beyond, which is basically any deific force invoked by the paralelite to overwhelm national governments epistemologically and ontologically. And this invocation precipitates the subsequent introduction of a deus ex machina in the form of a technocratic world state. And of course, such a global managerial model would be an advantageous arrangement for the paralelite because they lay claim to some vaguely defined socio-political gnosis, some secret knowledge concerning the operations of the natural order of the cosmos, this insight that we supposedly are not privy to, but they are. They're policy professionals, they're technical and scientific, they're experts. They lay claim to this gnosis, and that's what basically legitimizes their hegemony, and it qualifies them to lead humanity towards a glorious transfiguration. But typically the beyond assumes a form that's derivative of the deific powers that we see populating classical mythology. Thanks to Immanuel Kant's epistemological revolution, the external world, the world out there, it's been rendered a terra incognita, a dark continent. It's completely and totally now unknowable, at least arbitrarily deemed unknowable. And with all the metaphysical certainties of the classical era abolished, with basically the external world now declared this terra incognita, and all the things that we once held aloft and cherished as metaphysical certainties, God, angels, a transcendent order, the soul, a new class of myth makers is now free to populate the terra incognita of the external world with their own surrogates for the divine. And you basically see where these new myths basically are bowdlerized and distorted versions of the classical myths, where the classical myths really pointed to truths beyond themselves. They basically elucidated man's place in the cosmos, provided insights concerning humanity and concerning those shortcomings that man had to work with, those truths that man had to grasp. These new myths really are just myths in the pejorative sense. They elucidate no real truths. They simply act as affirmations of man's hubris, of the autotheistic propositions of the elite. And we see this inversionist narrative tradition on display with the various invocations of the beyond. The beyond can be invoked as a wrathful earth goddess, which is a distortion of God's immanence and the relationship of the feminine to the divine. We see the beyond invoked as AI and technological singularity, and that's basically God's transcendence reinterpreted as the mere circumvention of biological constraints. The beyond invoked as the super weapon, that's Promethean fire, reinterpreted as an attainable deific power, and a Gnostically reinterpreted Messiah that will liberate man from corrupt materiality. And of course, the beyond invoked as extraterrestrial gods. This is a reinterpreted taxonomy of angels, demons, and other heavenly beings, the most significant of which is, of course, God. But there's nothing, these new myths, there's nothing that really of any transcendent value to them. There's no real transcendent truth to them. They're just myths in the pejorative sense and anything. But
right, but these myths, these new mythologies, are kind of reconstructs of old Gnostic or old ideas. So the alien is always an evolutionary being. He's pushing forward evolution. He's
absolutely.
not pushing right. So you see, yeah. So that's why they're menacing. And these are religious. They take on a definite religious.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'd like to point out also that our book, while it's very long, the invocations of the beyond are so innumerable that it's beyond the scope of any one book. We're now just coming out of a major invocation of the beyond with the coronavirus. The coronavirus was the beyond invoked as the raid of the germs, as H.G. Wells would have called it, or disease, or the plague.
The plague. It was a poorly constructed, hastily put together invocation, but it was an invocation nonetheless, and it did have the desired effect to a certain point with the population, because you had a whole cross section of the population that was actually willing to take these vaccines that had been put together in such a small frame of time. The average vaccine is about 15 to 20 years of development, with many years of safety observations put into place before you even consider putting them out for the public. With this invocation of the beyond, people were willing to take something that was in development for under a year, with none of the regular safety protocols, and actually placing it into their bloodstreams. And then another way that invocation was successful was that we saw the implementation of these lockdowns, which were completely ruinous from an economic standpoint. From the standpoint of one's economy, it was absolutely destructive.
And also from the standpoint of mental health and in terms of people's overall state of mind, it had a very adverse effect. But it really did constitute another invocation of the beyond, because this thing called coronavirus, its ontology seemed to be relatively indeterminate. There was no real defining it. There was no real its true abilities, its true the extent to which it, how it was transmitted, the extent to which it could be transmitted was never clearly defined. And then you had as a result this epistemological confusion that arises, because now anything and everything that was any sort of observations or information concerning this new plague that did not prove to be socially and politically expedient for the public health officials and for the people who were basically managing the outbreak. Well, it was deemed quote unquote misinformation. So yeah, and so we're now moving out of that, and the power elite here in the West seems to be trying to transform its favorite boogeyman into another invocation of the beyond, the Slavic savage. Because the Slavic people have always been a target of elitist circles here in the West, because elitist circles here in the West have a tendency to be characterized by they tend to be Anglophilic. They tend to be Anglophile in their orientation, and all. They draw a lot of their inspiration from John Ruskin and from Cecil Rhodes, and from their notions of world government, which in its earliest form would be a kind of confederation of the English-speaking people under the British, and those. So
the Russians have been one of the most useful allies of the American elites since after World War II. No question. They have served as the boogeyman. They have invoked the beyond, the reason for creating these massive weapons, for the Cold War, for the massive theft of value globally and the wealth transference from 1945 to the present now. So they are very worthwhile. Very worthwhile. The economy of Russia is the size of Texas.
Yeah,
I
mean, if you want to talk about an economy that could actually pose a serious threat to the United States, it would probably be China. It wouldn't be Russia. China is probably the second largest. Yeah, I mean, it's the workshop of the world, but they just keep on finding ways of taking us back to Russia, taking us back to the Slavic people, and trying to turn them into the Slavic savage. And
one of the things I'd like to add too is that very important context is Biden slipped his tongue and said there's going to be a new world order. So that's an elite philosophy. That's not something people talk about at the local bar, but among wealthy people who don't have to work, that's a philosophic concept. And he let it slip, and he's let slip all kinds of stuff actually, but you can tell what he's thinking. He's not very circumspect in his blubberings, but I think that's very important in the context of your book. So please.
Right, absolutely. And accompanying this new world order, which is really just a euphemistic phrase used to refer to a technocratic world state. Accompanying a new world order is a new man, and that is the ultimate. That's the penultimate goal to which they've directed all their efforts. The para-elites Promethean anthropology, we see it's affirmed by Kant's ethical theory, which naturally follows from his dysteleological portrait of the world. After all, if you have if an ordered world implies that there is a moral order with which the human must align itself. If that order is undermined, if that order is non-existent or imperceptible, as Kant proposed it to be, then it stands to reason that the human will must govern itself. And such an autotheistic ethical proposition is affirmed by Kant's deontological ethics, because according to Kant's deontological ethics, moral values find their source exclusively with human reason. And God is no longer the ontological source of all moral values. Instead, the all-embracing moral imperative, or categorical imperative, as Kant calls it, is rationally derived from man's universalization of maxims, and those maxims that can be universalized supposedly without logical contradiction qualify as categorical imperatives. Thus, reason supplants God as the source of moral law. It's truly ironic that Kant would elevate reason to such a lofty status when his epistemological theory really simultaneously neuters it. If man's cognitive faculties are not trustworthy in the discernment of the external world, why should they be regarded as reliable in the formulation of tenable ethic? But nevertheless, Kant virtually apotheosized human reason, thereby rendering man as an absolutely self-determining being. And an anthropological doctrine of absolute human plasticity from this arose. Man becomes his own creator, a metaphysical proposition that affirms the Gnostic soteriological claim of self-salvation. And so we are presented with the Luciferian Promethean anthropology that was dignified by Gnostic theology and popularized by the 18th century Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, which was arguably a Gnostic revival, provided the formative ethos wherein Kant's ideas were developed. And several Enlightenment theoreticians, you see them actually viewing Lucifer through an inverted hermeneutic that we see presented in the Egyptian Gnostic text, the Hypostasis of the Archon. This Egyptian Gnostic text that portrayed the serpent in Eden as humanity's benevolent instructor and incognito savior. It provided the inverted hermeneutic through which Lucifer would be understood by today's political theoreticians. This is how Lucifer was understood by Enlightenment theoreticians. Lucifer becomes basically the schematic, the anthropological schematic to which man must be conformed, and that's ultimately the goal to which they're working.
Right. I mean, it really is. So this new man will be like the Luciferian man, right? The self-saving creation who is based upon Gnosticism. And I think that it flows through Nazism, right? That's kind of the philosophical subtext of that political party too, was its Luciferianism. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Adolf Hitler supposedly candidly confessed to Hermann Rauschning that man, quote unquote, man was becoming God, as Adolf Hitler allegedly had put it. But this is actually a parody of the Orthodox soteriological doctrine of theosis. Theosis, which was understood as basically salvation. It was as it was exposited by Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. He basically it basically held that man would become a reflection of God, an imager of God. So man wouldn't become ontologically the same as God, but that he would reflect God and reflect God's glory. To make a distinction, it was deification, but it was deification by energies, not by essence. That through cooperation with God, man could reflect God's glory. This is a parody of that, and this is actually autotheism, which was ideologized by theoreticians like Diderot, Comte, Feuerbach, Hegel, Marx, Bakunin, Proudhon, Nietzsche, Hitler, Saul Alinsky, but continually insinuating himself through the ideas of such man is the fallen angel whose lies were suddenly rendered palatable by academic vernacular. And while his existence was often rejected by these theoreticians, Satan nevertheless remained the inspiration for the ideas, and he was repeatedly invoked as an illustrative analogy for apotheosized man. But we see that with all the invocations of the beyond, the possibility for the emergence of this new man. In particular, for instance, with the beyond invoked as extraterrestrials. Well, extraterrestrials are supposedly these deific beings. They're practically deific beings. As a matter of fact, according to the extraterrestrial creation myth of panspermia. We are a product of their experimentation, but evolutionarily speaking, they are supposedly us as we will become. And since they are these deific beings, then the assumption is that we will become as God.
Right. I mean, it's pretty scary. That's one interpretation of that. If you take my interpretation that aliens are demons, that makes it even scarier. Which
Right.
is,
well,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, we even go into some of the evidence that that's some of these okay, some of it is obviously advanced R&D,
Right.
that's being used by
You
deep.
talk, sorry to interrupt, but you talk about Adamski, you talk about Dolas, you talk it going back that this mythology of aliens has been tinkered with by intelligence agencies from the past, and in my opinion, to the present. If you take to the Stars Academy,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry,
but some of it's advanced R&D. We don't deny that advanced R&D is being used by deep state circles to bring about social engineering. But there's also this occult aspect to it. For instance, if somebody that we go into in great detail in the book is an individual by the name of Christopher Mellon. Christopher Mellon is one of the most vocal individuals out there right now concerning UFOs. He and Luis Elizondo have hit the media circuit really hard, trying to get people to buy in hook, line, and sinker on the whole idea of UFOs. And Christopher Mellon, he's if you look into his background, if you look into his biography, he's part of the He's part of this oligarchical dynasty, the Mellon dynasty, that claims Pittsburgh's entrepreneur banker Thomas Mellon as its patriarch. But Thomas Mellon belonged to the Pittsburgh Scottish and Irish industrial community. And this is significant because the Scottish Irish industrial community owes much of its existence to Freemasonry. Freemasonry basically established that business community. And Thomas Mellon's collaboration with Freemasons includes loans that he made to Henry Clay Frick, who was an infamous industrialist and union buster. And then there's actually been members of the Mellon family who were actually members of Freemasonry. I believe one of Thomas Mellon's sons, U.S. Secretary of Treasury Andrew William Mellon, was a Freemason, and according to a Freemasonic source, he attained the much coveted 33rd degree of Freemasonry. And that's just one example of one individual who's involved in the UFO deception who has an occult background there. Other individuals would be the now deceased. He was a Satanist. Michael Aquino. I'm sorry,
Michael Aquino. Yes.
Yeah, Michael Aquino. He was involved in the UFO deception, and a close associate of his who seems to get around, who was the number 2 guy to Bigelow.
Really? Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget Peter Levenda, who's deep in TTSA. He's actually ghostwriting stuff for
absolutely
Secret Machines, which I have a connection to. He actually ghost wrote something too. But yeah, Peter Levenda's an interesting character. You can watch, I think, on one of these things, him conducting an OTO ritual. So, and he's out. No, Levenda flat out. I'll send it to you. Flat out conducting an OTO ritual with Wasserman and some of these known OTO long-term characters in the States.
Yeah.
But he's Levenda's also involved in this like desert UFO in the desert thing that happens every year. So these are deep occultists involved.
Yeah. The number 2 guy to Bigelow that I was trying to remember his name is Colonel John B. Alexander. He was an associate of Aquino's through the Association of Former Intelligence Officers and all. And you go to his
Don't
website.
forget Vallely. Don't forget John Vallely.
Oh yeah, Paul Vallely. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah. So they're all working together.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you know, this all begs the question. How much of this is advanced R&D, and how much of this is the the invocation of diabolical forces, of preternatural forces,
Right.
and so we entertain that in the book, and we look into that because that does seem to be part of this particular invocation of the beyond. The employment of occultism, the employment of sorcery in order to give an air of authenticity to the
Go look at this guy Greer or whatever. He has all the occult imagery, and his meeting with the UFOs is just like trying to communicate with devils or demons or entities. Like he's out at night, and it's really something else. I'm surprised people can't see the similarities between the UFO culture
right, absolutely.
and that
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah,
I had a guest on just to add to that.
It brings up a whole.
Go ahead.
But it brings up a whole new possibility that people need to to consider when they're looking at that particular invocation of the beyond. And if you have deep state operatives that are also practicing occultist and are summoning things and are bringing things from that ontological intermediary plane, that area known in Orthodox Christian circles as the sky, which is this kind of intermediary area between heaven and earth, and they're collaborating with these things. Then it starts to beg the question, who's controlling who, and is the deep state really in control of, or are these things in control of the deep state? Because these things, you obviously you're not in a position to issue any kind of demands to them, and they've shown themselves to be of an intelligence and of a level of power to where they are able to best you. You're not in a position to give any decrees or commands or anything to them. So who's controlling who? Is it the deep state, or is it these diabolical forces, that these demons that are controlling the deep state?
It's a great question.
It's a great question. It's a question that the more secular portion of the audience would not like to look into and all, but but the fact that they're involved in this in these occult practices, and that invariably the occult practices become a topic of discussion when we're looking at the UFO deception, it has to be asked. Those questions have to be asked.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. I mean, are these seances to contact them? They want to obtain knowledge from them. So that's really very telling. So what kind of knowledge are they obtaining? Why are they communicating with them? I mean, I think that's very telling, because that similarity of trying to contact the UFOs is very similar to contacting demons. And then, yeah, I mean, it gets very deep. Out of control.
There should have been all sorts of red flags that were set off in the ufological circles out there in the UFO community when people like John Keel published his book Operation Trojan Horse, and Jacques Vallée published his book Passage to Magonia, where in both of those books they forthrightly said, yes, this mirrors everything that one would study in demonology, and and they just forthrightly put it out there. But no one's going to ever accuse the UFO community as being an overly intellectual bunch of people, But
an interesting research that ties into your story is I've been kind of looking through some of these mind control doctors, and they were interested in alien abduction. So some of these same dark figures of the CIA are involved in studying people and this phenomenon. And it's very disturbing. People should be very concerned about being in those communities, because there might be some very interesting people, because it does pertain to mind control states, disassociation, possession, and they're studying it. So they're not studying it like a ufologist. They're studying the phenomenon as somebody who's a psychologist with experience in mind control. That should scare people.
I know that the Satanist that was a consultant to Operation Often, which was a CIA operation. Her name eludes me at the moment. I believe it was Hotfoot Jackson or something like that. She was basically a witch that helped them to, come into contact with all the different covens here in the United States. But she forthrightly said, like, yeah, the aliens and demons are one and the same, and this is somebody that's acting as, as a consultant to the CIA, as acting as a consultant to Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was heading up Operation Often.
Right.
And so so the people in the intelligence community were privy to this, and
Interesting. I mean, it's incredible that you mentioned Dulles in your book as being, overseeing Adamski, and if you don't agree with that, we're gonna get an injunction against you, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because Adamski, there was a Cincinnati lawyer who wanted who basically wanted the federal government to bring charges against Adamski for using the United States Postal Service to commit fraud. That was where he was sending out his stories was through the United States Postal Service. But this Cincinnati lawyer said, "Look, you got a case against this guy," and so the lawyers at the CIA looked at this and said, "Yeah, there's a case that could be brought against Adamski." And in response, Alan Dulles said, "Anybody that tries to bring a case, we'll put a court injunction against them, out on them." And so yeah, I mean. Dulles was not just a consummate deep state player. I mean, from the JFK assassination to collapse of the Mossadegh government in 1953 to the collapse of Jacobo Arbenz government in Guatemala, onto the JFK assassination, on and on. He wasn't just a consummate
Warren Commission, all that stuff.
He wasn't just a consummate deep state operative. He was really a centerpiece of the UFO deception, and many people believe that his correspondence and his association with Carl Gustav Jung, that he exploited that association there to take Carl Jung's investigations and research into UFOs and exploit that and use that as part of the deception, the UFO deception that he was in part responsible for constructing.
Who is Jung? Can you talk about him? I'm not familiar with that name.
Carl Gustav Jung, he was basically kind of a protege to Sigmund Freud, and he was a psychologist who was deeply involved in the occult. He was deeply involved in the occult. Richard Knoll has written a very, very good book about Jung, called Aryan Christ, which looks into just how deep into occultism the man had went. But not only that, but how many Jungian psychologists today actually have worked to actively suppress that dark side to Carl Jung's biography, so that the vast majority of Americans today wouldn't know that Jung was as involved in occultism involved in as occultism as he was. But Carl Gustav Hume had done a lot of research into UFOs, and I believe that Clover Dulles was a patient of Hume's, and I believe, if I recall correctly, that Hume and Dulles shared the same mistress in Mary Bancroft, and through Clover Dulles and Mary Bancroft, they were able to, basically data mine one another. And one of the things that Dulles, looked into as far as Hume was concerned was Hume's research into UFOs, and he exploited that research in his concocting of several different UFO hoaxes and helping to construct the UFO deception that has gone on for many years, many years subsequent to even Dulles's death. So.
Right, it's still ongoing. So it started early. It started in the probably 40s or 50s. So it's just morphed, metastasized, grown.
Right.
It's really a religion. I mean,
right. Well, and if I may add, it may seem counterintuitive, but the primacy of scientific materialism, which we see enshrined through the likes of Sir Francis Bacon and what have you, that actually presaged this revival of occultism. That's because magic and materialism, they're not diametrically opposed schools of thought. Instead, they're developmental phases that run along the same continuum of thought. If we see magic as essentially being a species of materialism, it makes a lot more sense, because if magic invokes agencies that are suprasensible, they're not by definition supernatural. They're not in a theological sense transcendent. They're mostly regarded as at most preternatural. They are merely subtler, more potent aspects of the physical cosmos. At least that's how they're viewed. So modern science, in its most Baconian form, and Hermetic magic are both concerned with these hidden forces that conceal themselves within the material order, forces that are largely morally neutral, that can be harnessed to both ends fair or foul, that are largely impersonal, which one can learn to manipulate, which one can use for whatever ends their wills, whatever ends their wills are drawn towards. And so it's not transcendent. They're not transcendent forces in the theological sense, or at least they're not regarded as transcendent forces in the theological sense or supernatural. They're merely regarded as the subtler aspects of the material cosmos.
right.
And that's why you have the dominant view of magic and science as being entwined in the 21st century. As you had theoreticians like Maxwell, Einstein, Schrodinger, Newton, all effectively undermining the authenticity of matter in a very Gnostic way. They advanced this Gnostic allergy towards matter, which is ironic given the fact that scientific materialism only esteems matter as the sole reality, nevertheless, while undermining its authenticity. They rendered the physical universe as nothing more than a standing reserve, a Bestand of raw material to be manipulated through the sorcery of science. And the equation of science with magic, it's been explicitly promoted through several cultural artifacts comprising modern entertainment. For instance, the movie The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which had Nicolas Cage.
Right.
In that film, a physics student from NYU, he is taken under the tutelage of a magician by the name of Balthasar Blake, which is played by Nicolas Cage. And in one of the training sessions, Balthasar explains that sorcerers really just constitute this elite stock of people who can use 100% of their brain, and this distinction allows the sorcerers to manipulate matter. And the apprentice at one point asked, "Well, which is it? Is sorcery science or magic?" And Balthasar kind of just glibly replies, "Yes and yes," is how he puts it. But 63 years earlier, uh, before that film, you had Bertrand Russell, who declared knowledge, or scientia, which basically is what the sciences are, is a scientia in the Latin, in the original Latin, meaning knowledge. He deemed it a practical tool in the manipulation of matter, and this is the magical interpretation of science that's most succinctly summarized now in modern films. Another one would be the Marvel film Thor. Um, in that film, Thor basically tells Natalie Portman's character. He says, "Your ancestors called it magic, but or your ancestors called it magic, but you call it science. I come from a land where they are one and the same," and that's why you have now with the enshrinement of scientific materialism, you have it now segueing into an age of full-blown occultism and magic. And you see the intersections, for instance, in the ufological communities. And these are beings that are, for all practical purposes, while they're regarded as inhabitants of the physical universe, as indwelling the ontological confines of the material cosmos, they're still also regarded as demons and angels. And this is largely because
if you go back to the other example, earlier that we were talking about in 1972, Operation Often, the CIA operation that fell headlong into demonology, and it was headed up by Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb probably did not believe, in all likelihood, didn't really believe that he was raising hell, that he was summoning all these infernal forces up from the world of the damned, or something like that. He thought that he was just engaging in scientific experimentation, and that what he was trying to harness, what he was trying to weaponize, the Satanism that he was trying to harness, and the Satanism that he was trying to weaponize, that there was science to it. It's just that science will catch up at a later date and explain the inexplicable aspects of it. And he saw himself as, he saw it as, merely, he didn't see himself as a sorcerer. He just saw himself as a scientist doing what scientists do, even though it prompted him to go to a lady by the name of Sybil Leek. That was who I was trying to remember earlier. I referred to her as Hotfoot Jackson, but Hotfoot Jackson was actually her bird. But he went to this lady named Sybil Leek for help, and Sybil Leek was this Houston-based sorceress, and it was through Leek that Operation Often they were able to learn just how many covens were located in the United States. They were able to find out that there were, at that time, it was 1972, so it's probably a lot larger. The subculture is probably a lot larger now, but at that time there were like 400 covens operated by 5,000 initiated witches and warlocks in the United States, and and so Gottlieb looked to weaponize all those covens, and while making it look respectable, while making the devil look respectable, and in order to provide the devil with some kind of air of respectability, Gottlieb turned to the University of South Carolina, and using conduits, Gottlieb financed a course in sorcery at that university. And there was actually, it actually got a sizable number of enrollees. There were like 250 students that enrolled in the course and all, so, he thought that this was all just science, but and the inexplicable aspects would be explained by science in the in the future and all. But technically, if you really want to get technical, he was acting as almost like a satanic high priest.
Right. I mean, it's pretty incredible to think that he really was a scientist doing this magic. And one of the people who I interviewed is Charles Upton. You mentioned him in your book.
Oh
And
yes.
people can go back and look at the alien disclosure deception, the metaphysics of social engineering. He's done a lot of really good work. And he's the one that really said that the same phenomenon of these aliens is the same phenomenon people had in the 17th century when they thought they were being haunted by a demon. Trickery, fear, deception, all kinds of stuff. Same stuff John Dee experienced, who thought he was doing science too, right?
Right.
I don't know if you ever thought.
I probably about a month ago, I wrapped up reading Upton's book, and I also prior to that read his book Vectors of the Counter Initiation, and nobody synthesizes it quite the way that he does, because he's able to take the different views and show where portions of them are all true. And something that I think is very important that he pointed out is that some of these deep state operatives constitute what has been called in Islam the Aliyah al-Shaitan, the saints of Satan, the friends of Satan, and so some of the deep state operatives that we know for the more conventional, more traditional forms of clandestine politics have also been involved in summoning things over to this side from the other side, and the list of suspects for the Aliyah al-Shaitan, it includes retired Army psychologist, warfare specialist, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who's now passed, a retired Army Colonel John B. Alexander, American engineer and parapsychologist Hal Puthoff. We look at all three of those individuals in great detail in the new book. And suffice it to say that right now that all of these individuals have been deeply involved in UFO manipulation and occultism. In the case of Aquino, who founded the Satanic Temple of Set, there was blatant, transparent Satanism. So, I mean, like, if we are correct, and if Upton is correct, then black magicians are in fact participating in the UFO deception. And if that's true, then people have to consider, again, I go back and I say it again, that people have to consider the implications of consorting with spiritual forces. Deep state operatives employing black magic and occultism are as much puppets as they are puppeteers. A covert operator who invokes demons enters into a pact and an agreement with forces that are greater than himself or herself. So the deep state is well acquainted with manipulating and controlling people, but when it deals with demons, it is in no position to dictate terms. I'm sure that deep state operatives that integrate black magic and occultism into their tradecraft believe they are firmly in control. I can see them deluding themselves into believing themselves completely in control, but in reality, however, they are completely deluded. They are in fact completely at the mercy of their demonic collaborators. I think that Charles Upton put it best when he said, quote, "The magician is hyper-conscious of the influence he believes he is exerting on the world, but largely unconscious of the greater influence that the invisible world, possibly the demonic world, is exerting on him at the same moment," unquote. Perhaps, that gives us, it gives us a picture of how all of this UFO deception ends, with demonic forces determining that their human puppets in the deep state have outlived their usefulness and can now be turned over to destruction. And understand that these infernal forces have no love for humanity. One thing that almost all exorcists have described in exorcism sessions is an atmosphere of perfect hatred. That feature, in my opinion, seems to be universal. The only thing that a demon loves about a human being is the human's utility. And once that utility is gone, the demon takes great pleasure in turning on his human collaborators. So, what's going to happen to the deep state when it outlives its usefulness to the these preternatural forces that they are now in interface with. We'll wait and see, but it's not going to be pretty.
Right. I mean, don't you think it all leads up to some point that's almost kind of like what's mentioned in the book of Revelation?
Oh yeah, at some point that's going to happen. We're reluctant to visit the prophetic too much because according to the Bible, no one knows the day or the hour, and so you're not really supposed to set any dates. You're not supposed to become involved in any kind of calendrics, but it's hard to see how this can go much further without us reaching a zenith point, without us reaching a culmination, and without this reaching a final battle of some sort. It's hard to see this kind of cycle that we see can't keep on going on indefinitely. So at some point, what Saint John saw, and wrote down all of that pictorial shorthand that he wrote down, all of the different symbolism that he put on paper, and in trying to articulate these huge
eschatological events.
Yeah, these huge eschatological events. It's going to happen. It's going to take place.
Did you guys get a chance to read Upton's Dugan book? I think he wrote a book on Dugan. Did you read through that?
I haven't had an opportunity to read that just yet. I've read some of his critiques of Dugan. I agree with him entirely on Dugan. Dugan's critiques of modernity are spot on, but this idea, this notion that somehow modernity, that the remedy to modernity is basically having a clash of civilizations between the Slavic and I guess the Anglosphere and all. That's destructive. That's not that's not productive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think there Dugan kind of descended into some Gnostic propensities of his own, mainly a kind of a Manichaean binary that he either consciously or unconsciously found himself promoting, which of course these Manichaean binaries, they're always indicative of manipulation. They overlook the inherent complexities of humanity. Humanity is not so easily partitioned off into these immutable soteriological categories of the elect and the damned. And interestingly enough, that's what the Western elites themselves are doing in this case, casting the Russians as the damned, and they themselves and whoever happens to align themselves with the Western elites as the elect. And before that, they were doing it with the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. But these Manichaean binaries are really just they're really just overly simplistic categories of that really are disproportionate with the fundamental complexity of human nature.
Gotcha. Drone Dynasty's asking, why does occultism seem to hark back to Egyptian mythos? Do you guys have any ideas about that?
Well, the most that I could say is because that Egyptian priesthood, they meddled with a great many of those forces, and some of that, a good many modern occultists probably regard the Egyptian priesthoods as being one of several repositories of viable esoteric knowledge.
Yeah, they it's something that they turn back to as a source of inspiration, you know, the more modern occultist type.
Yeah, definitely Crowley. And Dugan has a Crowley connection too.
Right.
He's an admirer of Crowley, so which that goes back right to talking to entities, invoking entities.
Crowley claimed to have been in contact with an entity named Lam, I believe it was LAM.
Yes.
And if you look at pictures of Lam, there's a striking kind of similarity between Lam and a gray alien. You
And the
know,
cover of your book, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It happened in New York City, actually. It's called
Right.
the Alamantra working. And then
Right.
1904 was AWAS. So there's all kinds of, he called one the magician. He had all kinds of different entity things, but he always was praying to AWAS all the time. It was what you find out later is Satan. So he just used a different name to kind of conceal it. But yeah.
Right.
I think that's the big secret of Crowley that people tried to keep, is that he was just an outright satanic Luciferian.
Right.
Guys, we're at about 60 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I missed? Anything you want to kind of say before we wrap this up?
Well, I just on the Ukrainian and Russian issue, you know, because that came up a little bit during this interview and all, you know, and of course, I pointed out, you know, that's with that conflict there, you have the attempt to invoke the beyond as a Slavic savage, you know, it seems to be already in the throes of failure, because, well, we have, you know, a trade war that's shaping up as a result, you know, with all these sanctions, and the sanctions are actually now they're, you know, it seemed initially to be something that was hurting Russia, but you know, now it's actually starting to hurt the West. It's starting to cause problems with the, you know, the supply chain was already precarious. It was already in a bad shape, and you know, and now what we're seeing is like, well, the ruble is actually starting to stabilize, and you know, when we have all these supply chain issues, you know, so you know, this idea of chasing the Slavic monster is not going to be a popular one with the American people for much longer. So you know, they'll start to pull away from that one eventually, you know, not very long. It won't be very long. You know, they're not going to try to invoke the Slavic monster for too long. You know, and what I suspect is that we really are coming up on that time where the UFO deception is will have its day, where the ability to, you know, to create, you know, just you know, the kind of to replicate the kind of things that we see in cinematic depictions of UFOs, that's about ready to happen. That they're going to launch into that at not too distant into the future.
Right. I mean, the TTSA is really an attempt to hyper popularize and capture the, you know, youth audience, right? Through
Yeah,
DeLong.
you know, and DeLong was a little bit of a flaky dude, and TTSA, you know, some of the major players that were behind that one seem to have moved on from it. You know, Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, but they haven't stopped talking, and they haven't stopped talking about UFOs, and the media is listening to them and paying very, very serious attention to them. They're not ridiculing them, and they're not playing them up as cranks.
Right. No, good point. And where's the best place for people to get Invoking the Beyond?
Invoking the Beyond, that you can pick it up at Amazon.com. It's available as both a electronic book and as a physical print copy. The print copy is a little bit on the exorbitant side. We didn't set the price for the book. That was established by the publisher. We are assuming the reason it's so high is to cover printing costs. but the electronic copy of the book is only $2.99. So whichever format that you happen to prefer, it's available on Amazon, and you can also get it through iuniverse.com in both formats there as well.
Yeah, you guys have done an incredible amount of research. I mean, each one of your chapters is almost book length in itself. So ton kudos to you. And where's the best place for people to reach out to you on social media or websites? If
Right
you have
now,
any other questions.
right now, if folks want to talk to us, they could get a hold of us via our Yahoo address, the Collins Bros, TheCollinsBros at yahoo.com, the Collins Bros at yahoo.com. We're working on eventually starting a web page of our own. It's just been slow going, and we've had a few obstacles in the way, but hopefully before too much longer, we'll have our own little corner of cyberspace where people can check up with us. But right now would be through our Yahoo email address.
The Collins Bros at yahoo.com, correct?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
So people can email you there. And again, the title of the book is Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man by Paul and Philip D. Collins. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thank you,
Thank you,
William.
Will.
All right, take care.